Thank you, everyone, for sharing your Friday afternoon with us. Looking forward to talking through um, our support for building broadband and digital equity plans with Bats and Tribes. I'm Dustin Loop, the Project Director of Broadband and Digital Equity with WSU Extension. And we'll run through all things local broadband and digital equity planning over the next hour and a half. And to start that, I'm going to hand it over to the Director of the Washington Broadband Office, Mark Vasconi, to kick us off.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for making time in your busy schedules for this webinar that I think you'll find to be incredibly informative given the work that we have in front of us. I'm Mark Vasconi. I'm the Director of the Washington State Broadband Office, and I wanted to, I guess, just tee up a couple of remarks. Clearly there is a lot in front of us that needs to be accomplished. As is often stated, this is a once in a generational opportunity to ensure that broadband for all is a reality. It's somewhat disheartening in certain respects that it's taken a pandemic and then follow-on legislation to establish a substantial amount of funding in order to provide connectivity to all who are unserved. As I mentioned yesterday on the webinar, I think the first time I got on the internet was probably about 1990. And then in the later 90s and well into the 2000s, I spent a lot of time working for AT&T in Alaska. And that was clearly a place and continues to be a place of vast distance and great need. And while working to provide broadband service to rural parts of Alaska, those of us that were then in the industry were bemoaning the fact that there had to be funding. And lo and behold, now 20 years later, there is. But in unlocking that funding, there's a substantial amount of planning work that needs to be done. And that planning work really has to be done at least as a foundational level, a foundational activity at local levels. Because if the Internet and Investment Jobs Act and NTIA's program is doing anything, it's attempting to flip the script, as I've called it. Broadband deployment in America has been largely driven by returns on investment, but this tends to flip that script where the planning necessary to move forward is really now driven by community need rather than investment returns. But in doing that, communities need to come forward, and engagement with WSU and its extension offices is really one of the most effective ways for us in Washington to be able to move forward with the kind of local planning that the BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity does require in order to unlock the funding that we believe can come to Washington. So this is not an inconsequential effort, and it's certainly not an effort that can be done in a haphazard manner. So WSU has stepped forward in our partnership to be able to organize organized plans developed at the county level. And I tend to call these plans community action plans, because I think that's what we're talking about. We're talking about actions that the community believes need to occur. And then those are able to be stitched together so that we at the broadband office can move forward with the kinds of plans that are required by NTIA. There are basically two major plans where this input will be incredibly helpful. One is with a 5-year BEAD action plan, which is required to be filed on August 11th of 2023. The second one is a digital equity plan that NTIA requires. There's a draft for that that will be due on September 1st, with the final plan due on December 1st. There's also associated with House Bill 1723 from last Washington legislative session, a state digital equity plan is also required. And there's a substantial amount of overlap, if you will, between those two types of digital equity plans. So the work that's going to be done through the BATS and through your engagement has a place in really 3 different planning exercises that are required by law. So I really want to thank you all for engaging in this effort. I also want to introduce to you the consultancy that we have retained to help with this process. Their name is Guidehouse. I don't know whether there are any representatives from Guide. Oh, yes, there is. Sophia
Hi, Mark.
Pan.
I'm here. I'll add it after my name.
Right.
Hi,
Right, so
everyone.
Sophia Pan from Guidehouse is joining us. And in the next couple of weeks, we will be bringing them into the planning effort with WSU as well. So, I just wanted to provide to you some framework for why it is we're doing what we're doing. And at the end of the day, I don't think we can claim to have equitable service unless all recipients in all locations in the state have it. And it's essential for engagement basically in digital life in the 21st century, whether that be healthcare, education, commerce, economic development. It has a place in all of that, as I think we all know. So with that, I'll turn it back to Dustin. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mark, for framing that up and kicking off the discussion. To provide a little bit of the background on some of the community planning and engagements of WSU Extension. Next, I'll go to Mike Gaffney, who's the Assistant Director of Extension and the Director of Community and Economic Development Department.
Thanks, Dustin. I appreciate that. Thanks, Mark, for the kind words, and thanks all of you for sharing your Friday afternoon with us. Just a little bit of background on how Extension came to be engaged in this project, and then a bit about the project, and we'll provide more detail throughout the presentation, particularly later in the presentation, a little bit of discussion about the funding. I know we have a number of county extension directors and other WSU personnel on this Zoom, so glad to see you here with us. Some of what I'm going to say is pretty old news for you. But Extension's been engaged in what we call digital initiatives going back a couple of decades. And our engagement at the local level really, I think, came to fruition about 12 years ago with the formation of local technology planning teams in a number of counties. And a couple of places, the experience of those local technology planning teams then morphed into what we now call broadband action teams. The idea that locally informed, fully inclusive processes which allow the coalescing, prioritization, and then forwarding of local issues to inform policymakers and others is the most effective way to participate in the decisions about when and where broadband should be expanded. Those broadband action teams were successful in a number of counties. Stevens County, for instance, won an award a couple of years ago from the FCC for their activities. And those broadband action teams caught the attention of the state broadband office. When that office was reorganized in 2019, we signed an MOA to mutually work on advancing BAT team activity across the state. In 2019, neither the broadband office nor Extension had much funding to do that. That's no longer the case. during COVID times, we also worked together really productively on an idea that germinated in Extension and then became a statewide effort led by the Broadband Office, and that was to create a network of drive-up Wi-Fi locations whereby individuals who did not have reliable access at home could gain access to do things like take courses or participate in school or look for work or recreate. Or obtain distance healthcare, all of the things that we have found to be critical elements that can be provided with reliable digital access. Next slide, if you would, please, Nick. So coming out of those experiences and based on our existing relationship, in the summer of last year, the Broadband Office reached out to us to ask if we would assist in the efforts necessary to inform Washington's participation in the anticipated significant federal funding streams, about which you'll hear just a bit more from Dustin in a moment or two. And if we could take advantage of our capacities, the fact that we are a trusted local presence in each county, that we have connections and the trust of the communities in which we work, that our faculty and staff are accustomed to doing meeting facilitation, convening, those sorts of things, and to both managing and fostering collaborative approaches to all sorts of activities, made us a natural fit for this. And so we are now under contract to provide in-kind, direct, and monetary support for both broadband action and digital equity planning at the local level. And by local level, we mean both at the county level and on tribal lands for tribal communities, using the BAT model as the desired framework, but not hinged entirely on the existence of a BAT. The goal is the preparation and submission through WSU Extension to the Broadband Office of both digital equity plans and broadband action plans sufficient to support the state's competition for federal funding on those two big initiatives. And we put together a team and a set of collaborators to help us do that. Many of those collaborators are represented here in what you're going to hear and see in this presentation. But our structure is to mix state level support with regional and local support. As much as we can should be accomplished through our local extension offices so that they are direct participants in the provision of service and the enhancement of quality of life in the counties they have been serving for 100 years or more. And because that local participation and capacity is essential to make sure that these processes are as inclusive as they can be and represent as many voices, communities, and points of interest as can be accommodated in the planning process. As Mark said early on, it's that local participation and knowledge that informs these processes that makes the state best able to represent all of the interests in the state of Washington in the pursuit of those federal funds. We are still working out that capacity, sort of building this airplane as we fly it. But you will see the opportunity to access WSU at multiple levels, and you will see the availability of support from, through, and by WSU in a number of ways, either in-kind direct support, in some counties, direct support through extension office engagement, in other counties, direct support through regional capacity, and then some elements of mapping support, for instance, being provided at a state level for application at the county and tribal level. So more to follow on that, but really pleased to have WSU Extension doing what Extension does best, working with local communities, with the communities in which we are embedded and which we serve, to identify local needs, gaps in opportunity, and strategies to address those gaps, and then forward that information for appropriate use and beneficial application at the state level. I'll leave it there, Dustin, and turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mike, for giving us that background. And want to turn now to start talking concretely about what some of this planning will look like. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about the importance and the opportunities ahead of us, and the importance of anchoring that in local planning. Really, what we are ultimately trying to build here is strong communities. So while much of this webinar and workshop is built around the planning process, we really want it to be viewed as much more than that, and an opportunity to bring together those community stakeholders, both at the county and tribal level, to not only develop plans, but to have a foundation and stronger networks in place for ongoing efforts to plan and deploy solutions to get everyone connected, and using the internet in all of the ways that benefit those of us that have it. And so want to start off just with a little bit more background on some of these federal programs that have been mentioned. I'll start with the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, and then we'll move on to the Digital Equity Act program. So the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, we'll call that BEAD from now on because it's a bit of a mouthful, is administered by the National Telecommunication and Information Administration, or the NTIA. And I'll mention now that there might be a lot of terminology in here that may be new, and so included in the workbook that we'll be running through later is a glossary that includes a lot of definitions that can be referenced while you familiarize yourself with new acronyms and new terminologies that are established in some of these programs. So the BEAD program makes federally $42.5 billion available for broadband deployment programs, and the NTIA will be announcing how those funds get distributed by June 30th of this year, 2023. And at that point, we'll find out how much funding is available to the state of Washington, but it's sure to be a significant amount of funding. And in order to participate in this program, as Mark was mentioning earlier, there's a requirement to develop a series of plans, starting with a 5-year action plan, an initial proposal, and a final proposal, all of which unlock or work towards unlocking the full amount of funding available to build out broadband in the areas that need it the most. And it's incredibly important that throughout this process, the BATs and tribal action plans inform and help shape the state's plans. And you can see here on this timeline just a sense of how this planning will proceed, starting with this 5-year action plan, and the BAT and tribal action plans being completed sometime in early June, in order to get information, data, and priorities over to the state to help inform the content of the 5-year action plan, the initial proposal, and the final proposal moving forward. And as I was mentioning earlier, the planning doesn't end there. So there will be a need for ongoing planning, engagement, and implementation throughout the whole process. So the way that this process will work is after receiving those funds, the State Broadband Office will administer a sub-grant program that will support the deployment of broadband infrastructure throughout the state. And the way it's structured, they're required to first identify all of those unserved areas. That would be those that are lacking access to reliable internet at speeds of at least 25 download and 3 upload megabits per second. And then to the underserved areas, those that are lacking access to reliable internet at speeds of at least 120. And so in identifying those areas and determining the plans to build out to them, that's again why it's so important that there's this local knowledge and local effort going in to help identify those gaps, what some of the barriers to build out have been, and really inform the plans and proposals to address that. I'll invite Mark to add anything to that if you'd like to. Feel free to jump in if you'd like, Mark. But
yeah, this is, again, in order to do this, there's a lot of identification of need that and projects that are going to be necessary to move forward with the 5-year plan, and then into what is eventually going to be what's called the initial proposal. I do think that it's probably realistic to think that funding will likely not start to show up until the very latest part of 2023 and most likely into 2024. So I just wanted to try to put that time dimension on what we're doing. So we'll be, time is not our friend here, but moving together, I think we'll be able to meet. We have to meet these timelines. But other than that, Dustin, I don't have any.
Awesome. Thanks for adding that and adding that additional context about when the money will start to flow. And throughout discussing these, feel free to jump in if I'm missing anything that you'd like to add. So the other component of these, or one of the other components, and the other one that we're focused on in this planning process, is the Digital Equity Act programs that were also established by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in 2021. And this also administered by the NTIA. A smaller amount federally available is about 2.75 billion for programs to ensure that when the infrastructure is in place, that all the people and communities have the skills, technology, and capacity that they need to really realize all of the benefits that come along with connectedness and full participation in digital society. So in participating in this plan, there are a few less steps, but a few more tracks, I suppose. And in this process, the state will develop a state digital equity plan, like Mark was mentioning earlier. And again, this is an area where it's critical that those BAT and tribal action plans inform and help shape the state's plans. And that beyond these plans, there's ongoing planning, input, and implementation to put some of these action plans into effect. And those will feed into the state digital equity plan, which will qualify the state to go after the state digital equity capacity grant, which will fund some of the programs focused around digital equity. And these plans will also may come in handy for those communities that want to apply for the Digital Equity Competitive Grant, which is administered federally by the NTIA rather than through the state. And if we could go on to the next one. So I already ran through some of this, but these programs in the context of digital equity are focused around addressing the needs of covered populations. And those include low-income households, aging individuals, incarcerated individuals, veterans, individuals with disabilities, people with language barriers, racial and ethnic minorities, and rural populations. And as mentioned earlier, there's also House Bill 1723 from Washington's legislative session last year, and that established the Washington Digital Equity Act, which identifies 2 additional underserved populations. So slightly different terminology, but in terms of how to simplify the process moving forward in our workbook, we include all of these populations under the definition of covered populations. And those additional populations that are identified in the state legislation is our children and youth in foster care and those facing housing instability. And so, as we think about all the things that need to go into these digital equity plans and all of the different covered populations, it's critical that these local planning efforts contribute, but also that they're inclusive, as was mentioned before. Have seen in the list of attendees here, folks from school districts, libraries, have been seeing a lot of community college participation in some of the local BATs, which is great to see, especially myself as a community college alumni from out here at Grays Harbor College, and a lot of folks from counties. And all of these stakeholders are going to be critical to truly understand what needs are being faced in our communities, and what those that are working to address it need to better be able to do so. And so really hoping the plans capture that. And so there's a lot of planning that needs to happen in a short period of time, and we'll go over some of those planning components, but rather than starting there and overwhelming you with all of the different planning components, want to start with some of the resources that we have available to support the planning process, and then we'll get into exactly what these plans actually include and give you a preview of our workbook. And the workbook's really just trying to provide a roadmap in navigating this process over the next 5 months or so. And so we have a variety of different statewide resources, regional support teams, key partnerships and tools that are available to support this. And you always have to draw lines somewhere, I suppose, when you pick a regional approach. So these are how we've divided up our ability to most effectively provide support in developing these plans and supporting the tribes and broadband action teams in the development of these plans. So in doing so, each of these regions will have a dedicated regional coordinator that serves as that primary point of contact and acts as the support lead, making sure that the right resources are in the right place at the right time, and making those connections when necessary and pulling additional resources in when necessary, based on the needs and identified areas of support that are desired by the communities that are participating. And I mean, that's something that we really want to emphasize here. We've tried to build a wide range of ways in which we can provide support, and really count on the local planning efforts to let us know those areas that you have covered and those areas where we can provide the best support. And so there will be additional regional advisory support, providing technical assistance and expertise when it's needed for certain components of the planning process, both technical on the infrastructure side, but also some of the expertise that might be necessary for developing robust digital equity plans that are designed with proven strategies for working with and reaching some of the covered populations identified in the state and federal legislation. And so in addition to that, we'll have a project manager that works with each planning process to just facilitate that process, help make sure that the plans are compiled correctly and meeting the basic expectations of what needs to be included and how that should look. So we'll look forward to in the near future as you start to move forward in convening and developing these plans, introducing you to the support teams that are available. And in addition to that, we have a variety of tools and resources that are available. Some of those are worksheets included in the workbook, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But one of the critical components here is the base map that will be made available to every participating community that identifies and includes the known infrastructure and known digital equity data, with the ability to add in local data to really improve that understanding of what's in place, where the gaps are, and developing a needs analysis based on that. And so I will hand it over to Claire Ward to give us just a nice little preview of what to expect with one of these base maps.
Excellent. Thanks, Dustin. Hopefully you all are seeing a map on your screen now. Can I get a nod, Dustin? Hopefully. All right, good deal. Thank you. So hi, thank you. Glad to be speaking with you this afternoon. This is, as Dustin said, one of the resources that's going to be available to the teams as you're trying to understand those two very distinct but connected tasks of this effort. Where is the broadband infrastructure? Where is the broadband infrastructure not? And what digital equity issues are our community facing and where? So this is one of the ways to visualize that. And I'm just going to walk you through the tool and kind of click some things on and off for how it will work. And then eventually you'll get to play with one of your own in your planning process. But this, as our example, is Lewis County. So the map starts out with this tab over here on the left that will explain a real high level how to use the map. And then you use this bar up at the top to click through the different folders. So there's 5 folders on this one. The second one is layers pertaining to anchors, partners, and points of interest. So you would be able to, on your map, click, for example, libraries, and be able to see where the libraries are within your community and have some easy contact information in there to help facilitate engagement from these different organizations, if you so choose. Hospitals, fire stations, you all can read, so I won't click on every one of these. But then it will also have things like, who are the electric utilities in your area? These would be the pole owners, so you can see how this would impact understanding paths forward for broadband infrastructure development. There's also, on this one, is more of a local piece of information. So this is one of their local ISPs, Toledo Tel. And you heard Dustin mention that there's the base map, but then there's also going to be an opportunity to load your own local data in here as you collect it. So this would be an example of what that might look like. A service provider saying, this is an area that we are serving in. I actually was talking to Toledo Tel earlier. They're interested in putting their actual fiber route on this map so they can see what areas have fiber to the home connectivity. So that's the kind of data that you might be able to collect during your community engagement and start developing a pretty robust tool for understanding where broadband infrastructure is and is not, and who the partners would be in fixing that. So then I'll jump onto the second tab, which is indicators of need. So this is, again, another way to maybe understand where infrastructure is and isn't. This, for example, is the State Broadband Office speed test data. We also have UCLA data on here. And then this might be a local piece of information. Lewis PUD conducted a study where they collected survey speed tests. So this would be their local data that they might add on to their local community map. There's a lot more here. And what's neat about it is when you click on all these layers, there's more information in there. So this can become a really powerful tool for understanding these different aspects of both infrastructure and digital divide. the last of the layer tabs is infrastructure and boundaries. So again, you click through these and it will help show you where different aspects that might be related to broadband or digital equity exist in your community. One of the local attributes that's on this map are some service zones that Lewis PUD developed as an infrastructure planning exercise to understand what solving infrastructure barriers might look like for their community. So I think in the ideal solution where it would be great if everyone got to at the end of this planning effort might be having areas like this on your map that identify where infrastructure might be an issue for your community. And then there might be other areas that identify where there's some digital equity boundaries, affordability, access issues that are happening in your community. And then you can target those and come up with solutions that might work for that area. Then the very final tab on here is this is more just the nuts and bolts. You can print off your maps, share your maps, change the base maps. So that just more gets into the nitty gritty of things. But like Dustin said, these will be available for counties, tribal nations. Folks who are engaging in this effort will be able to have this initial base map and then have the opportunity to upload their local data into it. And with that, I will kick it back to Dustin. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Claire. Really excited to get these into the hands of all the communities and get all that good local data added into it as well. So as we mentioned, in this workbook that walks through the plans, there are worksheets to help make that plan development a little bit more manageable and to make it a little bit clearer in how to go about it. And paired with that will be project management tools to help operationalize the worksheets and provide structure to the planning process and ensure that these plans get assembled and put together and submitted in the right way. And that is where our friends at Learn, Design, Apply come into play. And so want to just toss it over to Brooke McCallum to give us a little bit of a preview of what to expect there.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. Hi, everyone. I'm Brooke, and I am very excited to be working alongside my colleague, Annie, as the project manager for this whole program. Most of the work that we'll be doing is going to be in the background, and you'll find that it will be communicated to you through your regional coordinator. But every once in a while, you may hear from us and we'll be pulled in. But essentially, our goal is to make things as clear and easy as possible for everyone. So we've been working in the background on a system to make sure that everyone stays on track within the given timeline that we've had, and really making sure that all tasks are clear, everybody knows what they're doing, and that if anyone is stuck, we can provide the resources to those who need the help. So we're in charge of making sure nobody gets left behind. And we're also in charge of compiling all the data and making sure that we have everything we need. So that is what we will be doing. But you can look forward to hearing more about the systems that we're creating when you have your when you get to meet your regional coordinators and have those kickoff calls. So I am really looking forward to working with all of you, and I'm just very excited.
Awesome. Thanks, Brooke. And so in addition to these base maps and these tools to help guide the process, we will also be hosting a series of workshops and office hours that are will be held on a regular basis, and the workshops will be structured around individual components or aspects of the planning process, both around the infrastructure and broadband planning, as well as the digital equity planning and different strategies to go about that planning and to reach those provide strategies for reaching those covered populations and how to go about so responsibly. We really recommend, as you engage with those, as you look to address the needs of the covered populations, that you engage through those organizations that are serving those covered populations, and making sure that you're doing so in a respectful way that identifies the needs but respects the individuals. So that will be one of our early on digital equity workshops. And then I'll kick it over to Nick Pappin here, our technical director for broadband and digital equity here at WSU Extension, to talk a little bit more about what you can expect in some of the technical workshops and with the office hours.
Yes, thanks, Dustin. I appreciate you tossing it over to me for a minute. So I wanted to highlight that we have built and are continuing to build broadband.wsu.edu. Talking about digital equity, we actually have some tools for helping to find covered populations and entities that work with covered populations so that you can engage with those entities. Additionally, was mentioned just a second ago, but we do have office hours that are set up. We have 3 of them set up for next week on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. And if you have any other questions, or you're like, hey, this would be a really useful tool to me, please feel free to reach out to extension.broadband@wsu.edu, and we'll get back to you. And hopefully we can help everybody get the tools that they need so that we can get these plans put together.
Yeah, awesome. So thanks, Nick. So now that we've gone through some of the tools and resources that are available, I think we can now get into a discussion around what goes into the development of these plans. And this is really the heart of our workbook, and will be a big part of our focus over the next few months here. And so within these workbooks, there are, as we've mentioned, the broadband action plans and the digital equity action plans. And each one of those has unique components of it and distinct ways in which you'll go about identifying the needs and identifying barriers. But we do believe that it is important that these plans get developed in coordination with each other, and that there is effective alignment between them. And so really recommend that there's ongoing coordination as these plans are developed, and that the teams within the larger teams that are leading some of these different planning components are regularly touching base and providing updates, and ideally having a few members of each team sit on the other team as well, and making sure that really, as we think about the infrastructure, we're also thinking about all of the digital equity aspects of it as well. And so in doing so and effectively aligning these plans and developing these plans, again, just want to point to the importance of building and strengthening an inclusive broadband action team that includes all of the different stakeholders that are in your community doing great work, and providing important services to the members of the community, and understanding through ongoing collaboration, coordination, and conversation what some of those needs are, the barriers, and different strategies and around potential paths forward. And so for the two plans, we advise that the executive summary, which is always nice to write last, is a joint executive summary that weaves the two plans together. And we believe it's useful to do the same with the overarching vision, goals, and objectives of these community plans, to make sure that those goals and objectives and the overall vision is understood in the context of each other. So there are the broadband action plans and the digital equity action plans, like we mentioned. And for the broadband action plans, we're looking at taking those base maps, building better, more comprehensive version of those based on added local data, using that data that's collected to identify some of those needs, identify some of the obstacles and barriers that might be out there to that have obstructed or may obstruct the actual addressing of those needs, and then develop strategies around how to move forward as a community. And it's a similar process with the digital equity action plans, starting out with this base map, reaching out to stakeholders to collect local digital equity asset inventories, such as different digital navigator programs that may be available in your community, different digital literacy courses that may be available at your library, opportunities at your local community college, channels of outreach to help spread the word around the Affordable Connectivity Program. There are so many different ways, even if some of the services that your organization or the stakeholders in your community provide aren't necessarily something that you would think of as a digital equity asset. It may very well be one, and it may be one that's really important to reaching a state of digital equity in our communities. And then using that collection of those assets to conduct a needs assessment, and again identify those barriers to access and adoption for those that haven't adopted or had access to the devices, skills, or affordable connection that's needed to really truly take advantage of the infrastructure being in place, and then strategizing around the potential paths forward. And so in doing so, we have created this workbook to help guide through this process. And so we just want to walk through some of the components of this workbook, understanding some of the sections, which will provide more detail and be available for reference anytime when you need it for a lot of the things that we've discussed today. And then running through some of those worksheets that are available to help structure the planning process and feed into that infrastructure and support that your project managers will be providing. So Nick, I'll toss it to you to kind of walk through some of these components of the workbook, and then just call me in when needed.
Yeah, so this workbook was built by a group of us, and we have made it available on our website at broadband.wsu.edu right here. And it starts off with providing context of BEAD and digital equity, as well as sort of giving overall timelines and guidance to how to work your way through it. Additionally, we talk about the regions that are in here so that you can access your regional capacity to support you. And then finally, helping you and your community actually build the plan. And we're going to run through a couple of worksheets here real fast. The first one is a vision statement. And Dustin, I think that you had some great thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So, so this is an example of one of the worksheets that are available in the workbook. And Nick, I don't know if you have anything handy to paste in, but these are fillable PDFs, so you can use them and save your progress. But what's, we envision these worksheets being used in this case to align a collective vision around broadband and digital equity. And so bringing those community members together, taking a look at the different examples that are available and figure out what that vision looks like between the stakeholders in your community to help have that that guiding vision in place and a shared understanding of what digital equity will look like in your community. And so this is a pretty simple form. We'll have some that have a little bit more to them, but it's just a great example once you have it saved and you can update it, and everybody can reference the vision statement that you've agreed on. So I'll let Nick take you through the next one.
Yeah, thanks. So the next one, this is one that I think may actually sound a little bit more difficult, but we can actually provide you some tools that can make this relatively easy. From the community side, if you go to broadband.wsu.edu and go to resources for your broadband plan, you can download the ISP by county breakdown, which will give you a tool to actually go out and find ISPs in your community. So let's just look at Columbia County here. These are all the ISPs which report data to the FCC that they provide service in your county. So just going through and snagging these, you can jump back into the worksheet and just run through with each one of these 7 ISPs this worksheet. Alternatively, if you work for an ISP and wanted to grab this outreach form and just fill it out once for the counties that you do business in, you could do that and already have it prepared for a bat when they came to talk with you. And really, it's just going through, what are your plans? Where's your staff working? What challenges do you see? Because that will allow your community to actually help build an effective or build and inform the state about where the needs are for additional funding. And Dustin, I'm going to toss it back to you to talk about the digital equity asset inventory.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So this particular form, I think, is a really important one. Like I was mentioning earlier, there are so many ways in which that we have assets already in our communities to help promote digital equity initiatives and programs and services, and make them available to those that need it. So this worksheet in particular is useful to start out within the broadband action team or with the tribe that's undertaking the planning to identify things that you're already aware of. And we will certainly do some work to pull in some of those resources ahead of time as well, and pre-identify some of those assets if we're able to. But this is also a worksheet that once we have them broken out and uploaded on the website as individual worksheets, you can distribute out to different members of your community and just see if there are any of these different assets that are available that may not already be captured, whether it's public Wi-Fi connectivity areas, mobile hotspot or device lending programs, public computer workspaces, programs to support affordable connectivity and access to affordable devices, or just overarching digital navigator programs, or something as simple as a newsletter where you're happy to share updates around the services that are available but may not be providing yourself. These are all things that can help support the collective community effort for digital equity. So some of these worksheets you may just fill out once, and some may be used to collect input from multiple participants. And I did see, we'll get to Q&A in a little bit, but I want to capture one that I saw in the chat that's directly related to this, which asked if the fillable PDF format will be used in the final submission. That's part of where the project manager comes into play in that online framework that will be available. So there will be these more interactive databases and drives to capture some of this, and they can support in helping to get some of these the plans that are developed in these forums into that interface, but it will also help collect the data in a more efficient way. So so the fillable PDFs will be used, but will not be the final format of the submission.
And one more item in the workbook that we'd like to call out. Oh, shoot, I skipped the executive summary. Dustin, do you want to go over the executive summary?
Sure, yeah. So I mean, this is just another example of one of those forums that's slightly different. This one's a checklist just to make sure you're hitting on some of those points that are important to encompass in that executive summary, but really want to make sure that it includes the key points that you want to come across, both around the needs for broadband infrastructure and the needs for digital equity. And with our fancy checkable worksheets, you can track your progress as you're including those components.
And finally, the last component of the workbook that we actually talked about at the beginning is the glossary. This topic, or these topics, can be super dense and really sort of difficult to get into without some background knowledge. So knowing that dark fiber is just fiber that is in the ground ready to be used, it's sometimes useful to have that magic decoder ring. So with that, I think that Dustin, we were going to chat or have Mike talk about our support options, right?
Yeah, so in addition to the different resources and teams that will be ready to support these planning processes, there's also the funding support that is available. And I just want to give Mike an opportunity to quickly talk through some of that, and then we'll get into the Q&A.
Thanks, Dustin. As you've heard, we are going to be offering quite a bit of support that I would call in kind, right? The mapping and the project management assistance are two examples of that. We also will be providing assistance at the local level, delivered either through our local county extension office or through one of our regional leads. And then finally, we have available funding that can be transferred directly to cognizant planning entity. And I use that language because the BAT structure is different from county to county. The responsible entity will likely be different in many counties. And we want to make sure that we can account for those variations in the process. We had thought we might have the actual documentation ready to share yesterday and today. That's not quite the case. Most of you will recognize that at its core, WSU is not really a funding agency. Our model is to figure out how best to accept funding from others, not to push it out from WSU. We've got those policy and logistics constraints to navigate, and then we've got some policy constraints on the uphill side from the state broadband office, because these are state legislative dollars we're spending. So we're navigating those, and our goal is a short MOA to be signed by, and again I'll use the language, the cognizant planning entity. That incorporates a statement of work that essentially says we're going to fill out the workbook that we've just walked through. And the agreement to fill out that workbook may be one of three kinds of agreement, right? The agreement might be to do the broadband action plan component of the workbook, or it might be to do the digital equity component of the workbook, or it might be to do both. And depending on the choice of the planning entity on how much of the planning effort to undertake with our assistance, the funding amounts and streams vary. We've got two funding streams, and our anticipation is that funding will be available in basically three portions or three tranches. The first stream is to directly support broadband action planning at the county level, not necessarily by the county, but at the county level or at the tribal level. And we believe that after we account for all of the in-kind support, we'll have about $15,000 available in that stream for each participating entity, county activity or tribal activity. The second pot of funding is direct legislative proviso to support digital equity planning. And we have a total of $3 million from the legislature to support those activities. That's an all of these are opt-in. If the opt-in for digital equity planning is universal, if all 68 potential participants, that would be 39 counties and 29 federally recognized tribes, opt to participate in digital equity planning in concert with WSU extension, then that works out to $44,117 and loose change for each participating entity. And we anticipate that will come in two distributions. Single document required to be eligible for that, some performance after the first distribution to justify the second distribution. So that if an entity opts in to perform both broadband action and digital equity planning, the total amount available at the end of the process is just shy of $60,000 for each entity. And in addition to the in-kind support and the support through the extension team that you've just heard about during this presentation. I'm in the unfortunate position of having to say more news to follow shortly on that, but we really do anticipate that we'll have those documents and that process finalized very soon, so that as we ask or interact with county level planning activities or with tribes, when they say, hey, how do we get this money and when does that happen, we will have a ready answer, a form ready for consideration and execution, and upon execution of that form, a process for transmission of the funding, as I say, in three separate pots, if you will. I'll leave it there, Dustin, and again, we'll post the documentation on the website as it becomes available and be prepared to respond to questions about that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. So I think we can move into the Q&A question here shortly. Just want to, kind of jump in here and say, as these plans are developed and broadband action teams are compiling their plans, recognize that a lot of the tribes participate in the broadband action teams, but also develop their own plans, and so can be submitted both independently of the BATs, but also certainly encourage and recommend that regional partnership to take place, and for those plans to be coordinated and be included in the strategy of the broadband action teams. So don't view them necessarily as wholly separate processes, and want those to be well coordinated, should they choose to do so.